Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
That freaked me out for like.
Did you meet her on a Monday? Just
What's
out of
that?
curiosity. Did you meet her on a Monday by any chance?
Monday? Did you meet her on Monday?
You probably don't
Monday,
recognize
no,
that
it was-
reference.
It was a Friday.
It's
So-
a capacity reference.
Oh, okay.
I met her on a Monday and her name was Jen.
So you married your sister?
Your microphone's on. That's how rumors get started.
No. No.
We'll just start with
Good
that.
joke.
Just
though.
start.
Good joke.
Okay. Welcome everyone to a special meeting of the Lincoln City Council on July 25th, 2016, a special meeting to vote on tentative changes to the mayor's proposed budget. In accordance with LB 898, a copy of the Open Meetings Act is posted in the back of the chambers. First, I'd like to begin for our viewers with a little bit of background on the purpose of this meeting of the City Council. This council received the mayor's proposed budget on July 11th, held hearings with city departments, and met on just this most recent Saturday to discuss things, and now we're having a meeting to vote on tentative changes to what the mayor has proposed. We are doing this so that citizens know what tentative changes to the mayor's proposed budget the council is considering prior to the August 8th public hearing on the budget. There will be a number of ways we make these potential changes public. We will publish a summary of the mayor's budget along with our tentative changes in an insert in the Lincoln Journal-Star. We will post them online, and we will also publish an ad in the newspaper prior to the public hearing, again, which will be held on Monday, August 8th. Council will vote on final changes to this budget on August 10th, allowing the Budget Office to update the budget resolution and related schedules to reflect the council changes prior to their final adoption on August 22nd. The budget is adopted that day because by charter it must be done no later than at least 5 days prior to the start of the next fiscal year, which begins September 1st. To get started, I would like to ask that any of my colleagues who wish to propose changes do so in the form of a motion. Our City Finance Director, Steve Hubka, will call the roll on votes and will alert us if any motion is made that leaves the budget unbalanced. Otherwise, staff will really only come forward and offer input only if requested to do so by a council member. And I would like to open up for discussion. Trent?
I hereby move to amend the mayor's recommended budget for the 2016-2017 fiscal year for the purposes of eliminating the property tax increase as follows. Cut $425,000 from the Emerald Ash Borer program in the Parks and Recreation Department. Cut $600,000 from general fund transfer to the building and safety operational budget. Increase the amount reduced from general funds to be made up from the building and safety special revenue fund. Cut $69,600 funding of a planner to, and I'll pass these out so you guys can look at it as I'm going along. Cut $47,000 from the urban development department for a position there. Cut $16,937 from the urban development department for a portion of a position. Cut $5,373 from the neighborhood training budget and urban development. Cut $300,000 for the purchase of a new ambulance from the fire and rescue budget. Cut $95,000 from the greenways program of the Parks and Recreation Department. Cut $175,000 from the employee health insurance budget by reducing the budget rate from 4% to 3%. This adjustment shall be made in the general fund, general expense budget, and in interfund transfers to subsidy funds. Cut the transfer of general fund to the snow removal fund by $100,000 and increase the transfer from street construction fund to snow removal by $100,000 and cut the $150,000 unbased purchase. Then I also moved to amend the 17-18 fiscal year by cutting $425,000 from the Emerald Ash Borer program, $600 from the building and safety to be made up by Building and Safety Special Revenue Fund, the same $69,600 Planner 2, the 47 in urban development, the 16.9 in urban development, the 5,300 in neighborhood training, the $420,000 for debt service of 2017 COPS bonds, 75,000 from the greenways, and another 175 from the employee health insurance by reducing it from 4% to 3%. $100,000 increase from cut the transfer from general fund to the snow removal, and then cut $150,000 from on-base purchase.
Second.
Did I state all those correctly?
Yes. Yeah, this document works.
Thank you.
Did we get a second? Okay, moved by Trent, seconded by Roy. Discussion. Roy.
So I'd like to start out by saying that this was not my plan, but my plan was to go ahead and reduce the budget by $2 million to eliminate the property tax increase and look for another $2 million to achieve the property tax decrease that I looked for last year. However, I've been persuaded by Councilwoman Lamb and Councilman Fellers that to go along with this plan as a compromise.
Cindy.
Yes, I would like to thank Councilman Fellers for working and reaching out to everyone to try to find some cuts for the citizens, so the citizens wouldn't pay higher property tax. And one of the things that's bothered me through this whole process is the positions that serve at the pleasure of the mayor. There's about $250,000 in increases in those positions and raises, which I'm not moving to cut. But when we have the citizens of Lincoln looking at paying higher property taxes, higher water fees, and so forth, then that gives me pause. So I have a lot of people, especially in Lincoln and especially in my district, who are on fixed incomes. I think we've heard a lot about the increase in the number of senior citizens that people advancing into the senior community in our city, all around our city, and I'm concerned that they don't see increases by, $8,000 to $12,000 a year. At the same time, this is a lot. I know that Councilman Fellers has done a lot of work to work in ideas from a number of us. This wasn't certainly what he started with when we first looked, and I appreciate it, and I do appreciate also Roy being willing to maybe not work so hard to cut more out of the budget and reduce property taxes, although I think that would be a really fun thing to do. I appreciate the compromise and ability to meet in the middle on this, so I'm going to support Councilman Feller's motion to amend.
Carl.
Yeah. Thank you, and thanks, Trent, for bringing this. I really do mean that, and it gives us, I think, an important place to start in terms of looking at what we might, be able to do, hopefully, as the council works out a budget that works for us. There are quite a few good things in what Trent's proposed, but there are also some concerns that I have that in terms of our future and really our known future. For example, the number one thing on the list is the Emerald Ash Borer program, and the Emerald Ash Borer was spotted 1 mile east of the county line. And so we know it's here. We just haven't found it in our county or city yet. But we know it's here, and we have to start putting money aside to get ready for that. And the Parks and Rec department has said that they need $700,000, for example, to get their equipment ready to be able to prepare for that. So with this cut, that makes it difficult to get those funds together for us to be ready in a timely way. I'm concerned about the building and safety cuts and what that means to them when this is money that's been generated by fees, and it's there, and it's something to improve the services that Building and Safety provides to the community. Helping, when I first started on council, we were compared not favorably to Omaha in terms of how we serve businesses and others in the community that come needing help with building and safety issues, and I think from what I hear now, we're doing better than Omaha in most respects, and I just hate to see us negatively impact that. And then also the cut of the debt service of holding that off for a year in the 2017-18 budget. Not feeling so comfortable about that, but those are my reservations.
John, do you have any comments?
Do you want to?
I'm fighting a cold, so I'm keeping my voice low and deep. Well, I too want to thank Trent for the work he put forth. You know, if we look at our budget overall, we're going up. Even just a stagnant budget with our increases in property taxes, sales tax revenues, and all, we're going up. Our fees are going up, and so these are kind of cuts in the increases, so to speak, I think that Trent has put forth. And I think from the citizen standpoint, we need to do the best we can to keep it at no property tax increase. And as Carl mentioned, you know, there's some things that, you know, we can see that we may prefer not to do, but I think we need to be fiscally responsible, and so I'm supportive of this.
So for the past 2 weeks, I have had my head deep in the budget book, a little deeper than I wanted it to be. And mostly, in focusing 100% on the general fund. And what I have found is that it is hard. It is really hard. And when you are looking to cut things, it's real. However, we still have a lot of this process left. And like I said on Saturday, I'm willing to still have these conversations moving forward. I recognize the reservations about EAB. I recognize the reservations about the Building Safety Transfer Fund. I recognize the reservations about other parts of the proposal that I have. And I remain committed to work on those, just as I have for the last couple days. Just have had some good ideas that are presented, some of them that were added late to this proposal. But others that weren't, mostly because I didn't necessarily agree with their source, or I didn't think it was something that was meant for discussion here today. Because they could be, that should be maybe a separate negotiation, or, you know, something that we wouldn't necessarily be able to find consensus on. But we'll keep moving forward and continue to be happy to talk to people, share their thoughts about how we move forward from here. And I appreciate my colleagues' support on this motion, and their cooperation and the conversation that's going to happen as we move forward towards getting this behind us when we get into September.
Before I guess I comment on the proposal, I do want to thank you, Trent, for bringing so much to the table, for allowing there to be discussion. We had a lot of it this weekend, both with staff and informally. At our meeting on Saturday, some of these issues were raised. We didn't get all of the answers to our questions in that meeting, and I think it would behoove this process and make it possible for the public to fully understand some of the impacts of these proposals if we were able to bring staff up on just a few of these items. And I guess I would like to do that before we move into voting on this. I guess first I'd like to ask that Chad Blaha from Building and Safety come up and help us understand what the impact is of a cut in the general fund transfer to the Building and Safety Fund.
Sure, Chad Blaha, Building and Safety. I guess to answer that question, it probably requires a little bit of an explanation too. I know you all understand it, but maybe for the folks listening, what the Building and Safety Fund is, it's a kind of a floating fund that allows us to adjust to various factors in serving our customers' needs, and that is primarily funded or increased through user fees, which is about 80%, and then general fund subsidies that support the traditional general fund activities of about 20%. And how that works is we carry a balance, and we respond to, like I said, workload demands, permits, economic activity, and as the economic activity increases, demand on our inspector groups increases, and as they get busier, perhaps they're not able to keep up with that inspection load, and we start to increase it's an ugly word, but we call it the backlog of inspections that need to be done. As that happens, we need to look closely at increasing our inspector load. Well, to right off the bat, it's about $100,000 annual cost to increase an inspector with everything, and we don't have the opportunity to increase fees at that time. We look at it every couple of years, and so we use that running balance to gauge when we need to look at increasing fees. And so to kind of put an explanation as to what that decrease would mean, I don't know that I could accurately predict that. If in order to accurately predict that, we would need to know exactly what the economy and the workload's going to be doing over the next couple of years. And so for me, when I look at it, it's not necessarily about the number. One of the questions asked both Saturday and in an email is, what number could the department sustain? And I guess my answer is, to a certain degree, any number, because we would then just have to ask for a fee increase that much sooner as the workload caught up with the shortage of inspectors. And so that's how I would probably answer that. And the other question was, or part of that, how it affects, I believe we have an executive order that kind of shows guidelines for how the fund is supposed to be administered. And there's various items that we're supposed to account for in there. A cash balance for operating costs and a couple of other liabilities. We use also the unearned revenue, that backlog worth of our revenue to account for that. So where was I going with that? So
I think you sent us all a copy of that executive order
Sure.
in part to help us understand the rules and the parameters of
Correct.
the fund.
Correct.
Are there
And then
parameters of the fund we need to be aware of as we consider cuts to the general fund transfer to your
I
budget?
think guidelines that I feel are important. It is very clear in the executive order that these funds were specifically the fund was specifically created to serve the folks who pay the fees. Building permits, plumbing permits, mechanical permits. That's in the document almost verbatim. There's similar language in the ordinance, and I know all of those can be changed, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this fund is created by user fees. Somebody who's building a residential home for the first time, their fees are going towards. The expectation is it's going towards those activities that support that construction. And I think when making this decision whether or not to do the transfer, in my opinion, that's the more important consideration, is the appropriateness of using the user fees to support general fund activities, such as arson investigation, bomb squad activities, public education in fire safety. Our guys they put on classes at the schools every year, upwards of 65 times. And so all of that takes time and resources from the Bureau of Fire Prevention that is funded through the general fund subsidy. And to ask our fee-paying customers to cover that, I don't feel is appropriate.
Any other staff questions, Roy?
Well, I'm trying to wrap my head around what you're saying here, and what I've been told previously, but there's $8.5 million in the fund right now. Is that correct?
8.2.
8.2, okay? And there would, if, assuming there would be no further cash flow into the fund, it would be at 8.2 until you spent the $4.5 million you said you had already committed, okay? So I guess the question I have is, how did that excess, or how that reserve, build up over time? What created that to begin with?
Excellent question, and I've got a graph that shows the fund, but it shows the general peaks and valleys of the fund. As early as 2011, the fund was down to less than $3 million, I want to say 2.7-ish, around there, and that was right at the kind of on the heels of a downturn and kind of in midstream of kind of the downturn in business for us and revenue for us. And when we have a certain number of inspectors in each section, those inspectors are highly skilled people that take, in some cases, 6 months to a year worth of training before they are able to be fully functional compared to a fully experienced inspector. The department was not quick to downsize at that time, and so the fund, got drained, as you can imagine, with a decreased revenue and static staff. That's what happens. At that point, the decision was made to start decreasing inspectors. They were at 37 total inspectors in 2006. Currently today, we're at 32. And we are doing exactly the same amount of permits per year right now. And I think our customers would say perhaps we are starting to get to that point where our service is not as good as it was a couple of years ago, due to stagnant staffing numbers and increased business. And so we've been slow to hire also, and my predecessor kind of started that, and I'm kind of finding out hindsight maybe I shouldn't have continued the slow to hire and kept up a little bit better. But I would say that's probably the best explanation as to how the fund grew. We have not rehired and restaffed up to the previous numbers that we were operating at.
Also, I guess I'm also interested in, over time, that $4.5 million you've talked about. How has that number fluctuated over time?
Well, that's directly related to, like I said, the backlog of inspections, and that'll go up and down. There was a period of time where we had none. I believe I wasn't here for that. It might have been, it was probably, or I believe it was around the 2011, 2012 timeframe where there was a very concerted effort because we didn't have as much new business coming in that they worked on that backlog and zeroing that out as much as possible. Over the years, it has built back up to a larger number than we would want.
In terms of time for that backlog, what does that represent on somebody's building project? Is it 2 weeks? Is it a month? If everything stopped right now, except for the backlog, clearing the backlog, how long would it take to clear that $4.5 million backlog?
Well, if you go off of the percentage of what that would equate, months, maybe even a year. It depends on the number of inspections. Some inspections are, if you include drive time, are 20 to 30 minutes. Some take hours. Some take a full day. Down at the bigger projects, a huddle or an arena or any of the bigger projects. So to answer that, it would be very difficult to come up with. We have hundreds of different, categories of projects or permits that are in various stages of completion. I don't know that I could give you a really good answer on that.
Okay.
Oh, Cindy.
Thank you. Chad, thanks for being here today.
Sure.
So as I read the executive order that you sent us, and from what you've said today, about 70 to 80% of the operating expenses are paid through fees and permit fees and so forth, correct? And then the balance is paid for through general fund transfers. Okay. And so as I read the executive order, it looked to me like the general fund transfers, or they called it a general fund subsidy, was what actually ends up being a portion of it is banked at the end of the year into the enterprise fund, I guess you've called it, or the building and safety fund. And that is available for, as I read it, only for the operating expenses of the Department of Building and Safety. You can't go ahead and fund any other city operations with it, but you can use it for the operating expenses. Is that right? Is that how you understand it?
Are you talking about the subsidy portion alone?
No, I'm talking about the subsidy. The executive order says that the subsidy is what actually was being swept initially into this enterprise fund.
Oh, okay. Are you talking, I think, Steve might have come up to clarify, but I think what you're talking about, when the executive order was approved and the fund was created, we were starting with a zero balance.
Right.
And instead of waiting to the end of that fiscal year to request the general fund subsidy be deposited, that was done up front at the beginning in order to start with a positive fund balance. So it wasn't, I had originally thought it was kind of like seed money, but in essence it was just an advance payment on that general fund subsidy for that first year.
And then the way that it's grown over the years is when there's money left at the end of the year, that's put back into the fund, correct?
If there's money left over from the
operating.
subsidy? Or
From operating.
into the building and safety fund?
Yes.
Yes.
I'd like to point out that in addition to the comment that you repeated out of the executive order, in section 2, there's a detail of how the general fund subsidy is supposed to be calculated, and that was where we made an effort to determine what functions of the department should be fully fee supported, as well as what functions should be partially fee supported and partially supported by taxes. So that went into quite a bit of detail to get to the point where that subsidy is calculated, and then with that, then the comment on the first page, this fund shall be solely for the operation of the Building and Safety Department. It is not a potential source of funding for other city operations or projects. That was after the subsidy was determined that's appropriate for the general fund. So everything was meant to stay in the fund as well as receive tax dollars in order to support those general fund functions.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to clarify, because with Saturday, when we asked the question, there was a number thrown out that we needed to have 4 months operating costs in the building fund, and as I read it, it's actually 2 to 3 times.
Yeah, I did notice.
Okay, and so that makes a big difference. What I looked at is at the maximum we're looking at, even with the proposed budget amount of 7.1 million, looking at somewhere, we just have to maintain a fund of 1.18 to 1.78 in the fund in order to meet that threshold. So that was significantly lower than the 2.4.
I believe it says
we were talking
minimum of
Right.
2 to 3.
I understand.
So
I understand.
I think the practice has been to try and keep it a little healthier. I mean, not necessarily 8.2, but that's a function of a couple different things. So
I don't think this is encroaching on that at all. I just wanted to make it clear for anyone who is listening on Saturday that, it's not 2.4 million, it's somewhere between 1.189 and 1.17.
Sure.
Or 78. Thank you.
Sure. And
Any other questions? Steve, you're here. I'd like to address this one to you. Chad, chime in if you'd like. But as we look at cuts to a major budget, we've been, encouraged that we need to find the source for those cuts. And So in this case, we're looking at an ongoing cut to your general fund subsidy that would be replaced with monies from a fund balance, which is not an ongoing, but just an accumulation of one-time dollars. Can you speak to what happens over time when we swap out a general fund ongoing revenue source for something that is not ongoing?
Well, I think first of all, in order for this to be sustained, Chad's going to have to operate that fund at a profit each year with fees, and he's going to have to collect those fees from users of his services that probably don't think that those fees should go to fund general fund operations. So,
But, okay, so when we've had these discussions, one of the things that came up was, okay, so if we cut your general fund transfer, you've got to make up some revenue, and if you don't use one time, are there other ways you could sustain this cut? Could you, what are your options
Well,
for
like
sustaining?
sure,
cut?
like I had mentioned, there are a number of activities right now that are included in that general fund subsidy that it is assumed that they support. We are looking at some of those activities to see if some of those activities could have user fees attached to them. We have identified a number of possibilities, and they are all permits that would come through the city clerk's office, like sidewalk cafes, SDLs, dance permit, special event, sidewalk vendor, secondhand jewelry permits. Our fire guys have an activity associated with those. We do an inspection of each one of those permits. Right now, it's just through the that general fund subsidy. We could conceivably attach to that permit fee, or to that permit, an additional fee to those users that would come to the department to support those activities. And right now, we've only been really looking at this for a couple of days. It looks like those activities could generate, based on the numbers of these, that we think we get a year, we could generate somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000, and that was based off of a fee for an average inspector to perform that duty, their hourly cost.
Thank you.
And could I point out, just make one more general comment real quick? I think the department right now, and anybody next week or at the public hearing could maybe state something different, but it feels like we have a very good working relationship with our customer groups. The folks from the home builders that are part of our building task force, the plumbing community, and the HVAC contractors that are on our task forces. I feel we have a very good working relationship and haven't had very many, if any, problems over the years talking to them and jointly determining fee increases. I would not like to jeopardize that moving forward.
Okay.
That relationship we have.
Steve, can you stay put? Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
This is kind of for both of you. The building safety fund is sort of an enterprise fund. That'd be fair.
well, that's technically a special revenue fund because it does receive some tax subsidy for parts of its programs.
Okay, I'm trying to analyze or see whether there's an analogy to some of the other enterprise funds we have, like wastewater and the parking enterprise fund and so forth. Would you equate this to any of those?
Yes and no. I mean, it's meant to keep the fees in the fund. It's supposed to serve the public, which the other enterprise funds are supposed to do. But the difference between this and a true enterprise fund is that it receives a tax subsidy where the other funds do not. A parking fund, the landfill fund, the water and wastewater funds.
And what about taking money out of those funds, which is essentially this measure?
Those revenues of those funds are protected by the bond covenants because in each of those cases we have bonds outstanding. So it's pretty strictly prohibited by bond covenants. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply in this case because we do not have any bonds issued against the revenues of the Building and Safety Fund.
Well, on the parking enterprise fund, for example, the city's taking out 1.4 million a year, somewhat higher at times.
Well, that's a long discussion, John, there. I don't necessarily agree with all the arguments that are made on that particular count.
You don't agree with the fact of taking it out, or?
Well, you know, for example, on-street parking revenues that go into the fund to perfect the bond security and then come back to the general fund. You know, those on-street parking parking places were there for years before we ever had parking garages. So, you know, we could probably debate this for the next 2 hours and get nowhere.
Okay, thank you.
Part of the proposal before us, I'm sorry, moving on, just has to do with certificates of participation. Can you help explain for people watching what those are, and also what it means to cut 420,000, that line item? What is that? Is that something we can live with? What happens with that?
Certificates
going away?
of participation are a form of bonds or lease purchase bonds that the city has issued for the last 15 years or thereabouts, primarily for streetlights, but for other purposes as well, including ambulances and defibrillators and the entryway and a number of other things. But what we're anticipating in the next biennium issuing those for would be an ongoing funding of our streetlight program. And when we issue those, regardless, we have to pay those. Obviously, we don't issue bonds and then not pay them. So what we would need to do is somehow delay payments until the next biennium, at which time we would budget for those. And that would then constitute a little more of an increase, obviously, in the next biennial budget for something that we started in the next biennium, but didn't pay for until a future biennium after that.
So we would have an increase in our interest payment and an increase amount of the principal that we'd be paying because we're paying it over 9 years instead of 10, for example.
Yes, if we delayed principal payments.
And we've got to make up this hole that it's creating because 420,000 has to be found the next time we come around to make a budget because it's not in this budget.
Yes.
Okay. John?
Well, on those COPS bonds, though, we could perhaps delay some of the streetlights too.
Well, some of the types of things that are done with the streetlight budgets really can't be delayed. There's streetlight projects that go along with road projects that you want to do when you're doing a road project, not come back in later. There's various repairs and expansions of the system. So some you could, some of the rebuilds, I suppose, you could probably delay. But there is a cost of doing that, of course.
Thank you. Does anyone on council have any more questions for staff?
I do.
Okay, Carl.
We have several people in and out of uniform. I've got a question about the ambulance. Okay. Now, I hope that we're all agreed that there's a need for providing, certainly we agree that there's a need for providing good and responsive ambulance service throughout the community, and as part of that, then adding an additional crew and an ambulance. There's been a proposal that one of our existing ambulances could be refurbished to be utilized. I'm curious about that. I spoke to a firefighter yesterday who told me the truck that he drives or the engine he drives is not in great shape. He has to watch his speed when he drives it. I don't want an ambulance where we have to watch the speed. We need an ambulance that performs well. So could you talk a little bit about a new ambulance versus a rehabbed ambulance?
I think that every time we add additional resources to public safety, that we ought to add the equipment that's needed to go with it. Ideally, that's what we do. If you do not add this ambulance, I'll have no choice but to hang on to another one of the ambulances that we otherwise would have decommissioned and try to use one of those reserves. We don't have enough ambulances to cover all the incidents that are happening in this community on our peak days. And that's what we'll have to do. Can we make that work? Yeah, we'll make it work. Is it a good idea? No. That's what dug us the hole that we're in with our fire apparatus, our engines and our trucks. And I hate to see us go down that road with the ambulance, but if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do.
Tom, you explained Saturday, and we weren't live on Saturday, about the numbers of vehicles that we have in terms of ambulances and how those are maxed out. Our ambulance crews at certain times, and you pull in other staff to staff those vehicles. Can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Sure. We have 6 staffed ambulances on duty every day here in Lincoln. And we have periods pretty much every day where we are out of ambulances. In other words, we've exceeded 6 current medical emergency calls to which we've dispatched an ambulance. When that happens, the dispatchers announce on the radio that we're at system status at 0. If an additional call comes in while all 6 of those units are on other calls, the announcement is system status red, which means all of the ambulances are tied up and we have another medical emergency. At that point in time, we take an engine company from one of our stations and put them into one of our reserve ambulances, which are stowed around the community so that we have good coverage. And the engine company is now out of service and becomes a medic unit for that period of time to respond to that call. And that happens pretty much on a daily basis. We also use our reserve ambulances to backfill the frontline ambulances when they're being serviced or repaired or remounted. And finally, we use those reserve ambulances for standby events. There are a huge number of events in the community that require a advanced life support ambulance be present. Leading the way would be NCAA athletic events like Husker soccer games, baseball games, basketball games, men's and women's, football games, baseball games, softball games. All of these standbys that we do for athletic events and concerts and Lincoln Track Club road races and other kinds of events around the community need an ambulance staffed with a paramedic and a firefighter. And we use those reserve rigs to fulfill that need. There were some days last year where we had 4 or 5 standby events going on at the same time in the community. So basically, we're running right up against the edge on the total number of ambulances, both frontline and reserve, that we can put in the field when we need them.
Thank you.
John.
Well, on that matter, Director Cassidy, we've discussed the fact that we have the ability, we could outsource some of the ambulance service under the provisions we enacted in 2000. Medical emergencies, ambulance calls are important, and that's what 82% of the fire department responds to. I think this gives us a great opportunity to do some modernization of our approaches. Let's go to the emergency response vehicles. Let's take the manpower and the equipment we have currently and deploy it better. And if you've got some times when there's all these events and so forth, that could be more work that could be outsourced to the private sector, keeping the city mean and lean.
We've tried to outsource that standby work to our private ambulance companies. Essentially, the NCAA requires this to be an advanced life support ambulance. We'd be more than happy to offload some of these standby events, believe me, if we had a provider here in Lincoln that was willing to do it, and we had a person that was requesting that service that was willing to have a private ambulance company instead of Lincoln Fire and Rescue.
We ought to work on that.
I think I just heard you say that some people, maybe you didn't say this, but some people don't want a private ambulance?
That's correct.
And so, but they can't run their event without one, correct?
That's correct.
So what would happen if we told them, we don't have an LFR ambulance, you have to go to a private ambulance for your event? They would just have to do it, right?
We've told organizers that on many occasions, Councilman. In fact, we're about to tell Lincoln Public Schools just that.
And so they still have their event because they do get a private ambulance,
Well,
correct?
they'll have to do something. I just can't, I don't have enough personnel or enough ambulances to
So in the
take on
past, have
another.
they canceled events, or have they went ahead and hired a private ambulance?
I can't, off the top of my head, remember an event being canceled altogether. I can remember events where they've had to go with some kind of resource that was other than what they really wanted, like a private ambulance company or even an out-of-town ambulance.
Well, you know the old song, you can't always get what you want.
I agree completely.
you need
It is it does turn a profit for us. I mean, we charge a fee for this, and they all pay. And in some cases, we require them to pay us before we'll provide the service. So it's good business for us. And, the EMS fund is an enterprise fund too. So we don't like turning down the business. But we're in the situation now where on some events we just have to do that because we cannot run the risk of jeopardizing the safety of the rest of the community so someone can hold their road race or their mixed martial arts event.
John?
Tom, you mentioned the ambulance enterprise fund, and if these ambulance calls that we do on a staff basis like that make money for you, then you should be able to pay for the ambulance out of the enterprise fund.
Well, these events do pay, obviously. The problem we have is that so many of our other runs do not. And as you know, we've discussed this on many occasions, that only around half of our total accounts receivable are actually paid. We have so many runs where there is no payee. There is no person that can be a private payee. There's no insurance. There's a reduced rate over and above what we actually charge because of Medicare. So it helps us to subsidize all those calls that are not paying anything. The standbys pay, and they pay reliably.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So we'll just weigh in before we move into the voting session, unless everyone else would like one more round at that. Okay. So, again, I appreciate the package that Trent has put together. I know he has worked hard, and I've enjoyed our discussions, and I can agree with a number of the things that he's proposing, and but we don't get to just vote on some of them. He's brought them forward as a package, so I just want to express my reservations about a couple of key points. And as I think about what we're trying to do with this budget process, to me, we've heard the goal of eliminating the property tax increase, and I share that goal, but I have a couple other goals, and the goal is to do that in a fiscally responsible way and to support the growth of the community, the tremendous growth that Lincoln has enjoyed over recent years. So it's a balancing act. The Emerald Ash borer is real. We know it's in Nebraska now. We know that it's likely to cost our city $2 million a year to manage this over a 15-year period. It's about a $29 million estimated cost to our city. We have looked at a number of ways to pay for this, and in the most recent discussion for the stormwater bond, the discussion at this council was to put money for this in the budget. The money in the budget that the mayor proposed is almost $1 million per year, which doesn't even achieve that estimated $2 million a year per cost. To cut it further is, I think, a non-starter. This is one of the ways that by putting money, a modest amount that will help us manage this problem, we will able to manage costs effectively. If we kick the can down the road, we are looking at increasing the cost to deal with this problem. It's a real problem. It's an expensive problem. It will be more expensive if we put it off to tomorrow. With the Building and Safety Fund, I think we do have to really be mindful about the folks who paid fees expecting those fees to be used for their intended purposes. And as we look at the general fund subsidy, cutting that will likely lead to fee increases in other areas in order to make that a sustainable cut. But we don't know if those fee increases will happen or not. So in the meantime, it becomes one-time money supplanting ongoing revenue source, creating our whole, an even bigger hole in the future. And with the debt service on certificates of participation for streetlights, we owe this money, and to put it off is sort of like putting it on the credit card instead of making the payments that we need to be making. And that payment just gets bigger the further we put it into the future. I don't want us to get into a hole. I don't want us to come to the next biennium and have to dig ourselves out of a $1.5 million hole. I want the growth of our community to pay for new things, to maintain existing services. I don't want it to be paying for a deficit that we create this year. So while I appreciate and agree with a number of the items in this package, the hole that we're digging with the Emerald Ash Borer and the Building and Safety Fund and the debt service cuts make it very difficult for me to support the entire package. Steve, would you please come call the roll?
Eskridge?
No.
Fellers?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
No.
Lamb?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carries 4-2.
Okay. So now we have before us an amended budget resolution. Are there other amendments that council members would like to offer to this amended budget resolution that is before us?
Okay. Well, I have a couple. The first one was passed down to each of you, and there's an attachment here as well, and this would be on the water and wastewater rate proposed increase. Essentially, it's been proposed in the budget that there'd be a 5% each year increase in the water and wastewater charges for that system. And I'm proposing that we increase the rates by 3% each year. So that would be, instead of the 5%, it'd be 3%. And the attachment lists a number of things that my colleague Cindy Lamb has also been helpful in getting from Public Works, but some of the things that would be eliminated. I know one of the goals in the rate increase was to get a faster pace of replacing water mains, and I would still encourage we do that and perhaps prune in some other areas within the system so that we can achieve a good production in that area. I guess I have to wait for a second.
Second.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Okay.
So,
Moved by John, seconded by Cindy. Discussion. Trent.
I have a little bit of reservation about this, and I talked to John about it previously. I want to figure out how this will affect us in the future. And I don't know if I need some more information from Public Works on this. I don't know how this would work practically, but could we lay this on the table and not take action on it, but have it as an amendment in the queue for the future? Or do we need to take action on today? This is a pretty big adjustment.
Jeff Kirkpatrick, City Attorney. I think the purpose of this working session is to do a markup on the budget,
Okay.
to put it before the community so that they have an idea and can respond to it. But as you recall, even 2 years ago, there were amendments made directly prior to the budget voting.
Yeah.
So in this case, it would be a couple of weeks down the road. So you could lay it on the table and vote on it following the hearing if you wanted to.
Yeah, John knows I'm fairly conflicted about this because I don't necessarily want to see large increases here, but I also want to have an understanding of what this does. I appreciate all the work that John's done to put this forward, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable with it just because there's been more focus made to the previous amendment than to this one.
So
And this one might actually be larger in revenue.
Right.
let me just be clear. So putting this on the table would not remove it from consideration, but could still be voted on in the final budget vote. Is that correct?
Yes, I would suggest you have two alternatives, both of which would allow you to take public input and vote on this. I mean, you could adopt it today. It is not a permanent change in the budget. It's just a proposed change. And then, depending upon what you hear, you could vote to take it out, or you could table it, or you could vote against it today, and a council member could bring it back following the budget hearing. I think all of those alternatives are before you.
To lay on the table would take 5 votes.
That's correct. It takes 5 votes.
And I'm sorry, I should have talked to John about this before. I just thought of it when we walked up here and we're talking about the last amendment because I knew this was coming. But I don't know if you would be okay with that, John, of having it as a pending thing so we could get some more information on it, or?
If we do that, how would that be explained to the public in the publication that goes in the Journal Star and so forth, so that they know this is something? I think essentially what Trent is saying, that if we're thinking about this, but we didn't actually act on it.
Our office works on the insert, and I'd be happy to make whatever adjustment you felt needed to be made to make that point, whether it says council is considering a reduction from the 5% to 3%, or however you want to word it. Unfortunately, however, the deadline for this is today. So after we get done, we'd have to have a quick huddle and determine what we wanted that to say.
This is a separate part of the budget. It's a separate ordinance,
Right.
of course.
I think with the goal of making the impact known to the public as early as possible in the process, whether or not we lay it on the table or what we do with it right now, it would be good to have staff come up and respond to this proposal so that we can try and understand it, its impact, because if we lay it on the table for consideration later, it's going to give without that discussion, it's going to make it harder for the public to understand
We can't
what
have
we're
that
considering.
discussion later too, though.
We certainly can have it
Okay.
again, but in the interest of giving the public as much time to comprehend the proposal, I would like to understand it too.
Okay. Council members, Mickey Esposito with Public Works and Utilities, and I have Donna Garden here as well to help me through this, explain this issue. Today, we provided some information on what a reduction to 3% equates to. It's about $2.1 million per year.
Can you move the microphone closer to you, Nikki? Sorry, it's hard to hear you.
Sure.
Yeah, there you go.
It's about $2.1 million per year. Total over the 6-year CIP would be $14.7 million. Projects that may be impacted, and I don't know, Donna, if you want to run through the projects themselves, or
I
if you
can,
want
very
me to do that.
briefly. On the water side, we're impacted in a number of ways. Obviously, the water main replacement program would be impacted. We've talked about that. We also have a very large pump station that we need to install, and that's in the first year of the CIP, that could be affected by this rate decrease, and that's the Yankee Hill Pump Station. It provides service to the southeast part of Lincoln, which includes the Heart Hospital and the Walmart area, and also the growing area that's in the southeast part of Lincoln. It could also impact, since it does, once we change the rates at the beginning of the period, it affects the whole period along the way, because those rates aren't with us at the beginning. So it could impact also our water reserve fund possibility, the geotechnical work that we're looking at for the other source of water for us, going to the Missouri or other options down the road. Those are fairly big impacts in water. In wastewater, the impacts are that we've looked at are mostly trunk sewer installation for our new growth areas. Beal Slough affects both year 1 and year 2, a considerable amount, and would address that initial first 2 years of cut in rates. But down the road, we have a number of new growth projects, including Oak Creek Trunk Sewer and Stevens Creek Trunk Sewer, which is coming here very soon in years 2 and 3. And there is a possibility that there's a nutrient removal project in our CIP for wastewater in the years 5 and 6 that could be delayed, but that's based on whatever regulatory changes there are out there in the future. And I know, Councilman Christensen, you talked about the biogas project. We'd respectfully like to keep that in the CIP to keep our options open for, and we'll certainly look at the option that you proposed the other day for looking at a public-private partnership.
Yeah, we included that in the
I saw that.
questions
Thank you.
today, yes.
Right.
You mentioned using some of this increase in water rates to pay for bringing up water from the Missouri River.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we were briefed on that almost 2 years ago.
Right.
A lot of money. I mean, $30 million in today's dollars.
No.
It's a lot more than that.
More
A
than
lot
that,
more than that.
Half a billion.
Yes.
$500 million. Yeah. Okay. $500 million.
Correct.
So
With a B.
with a B. Yeah.
B.
So how much of this 5% increase would be dedicated to that? And where would we put that money to preserve it so it's untouched?
Okay. What we're planning to do is develop a reserve fund. It's included in our CIP this year. It starts in year 4. It runs 4, 5, and 6. Right now, there's only $1 million each year going into that fund. We also have the geotechnical work that will start looking for the areas where we'd like to put our well fields in at the Missouri River and do the geotechnical work. That's worth about $3.1 million. That's in
Year 3.
That's in year 3. That's correct.
Okay. So there will be a fund that is inviolable,
Let's hope.
correct?
That's the intention.
Question, Cindy?
Thank you. So I was looking, I got this memo really late after Saturday, and which is one of the reasons I think maybe putting this on the table for a little while might be good, just so we can go through. And at first, I didn't realize that we were having 5% in water plus 5% in wastewater each year. Is that's right?
Correct.
Okay. The second thing is I noted in here, and you mentioned today that it could affect, not passing it could affect the water main replacement going from 5.5 to 7. But when I look in the summary of the mayor's budget, it says that in 2017-18 that there were 2 utility equipment operator ones and the equipment to increase the water main replacement project from 5 miles to 7 miles a year. And then I did also note that there was maybe an engineer as I looked through the FTEs. And so, but those 2 operators actually doesn't get added till 17, and it's $84,420. So, and I looked at the increase in equipment and supplies, and it was only about $500,000, well, $800,000, I guess, and then $500,000. And so I guess I don't know why that would be necessarily on the chopping block if we went to 3%. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about that, maybe not even today, but as we move forward.
I think the program doesn't reach 7 miles until the second year in 17-18, and we
Right.
have design and engineering to do in the first year before we go forward.
Right.
with
Remember that those are construction crews, so you need them when construction is occurring. There's design work to do to ramp up a program in the second year.
Okay.
So that probably explains the delay.
Just to give you the heads up, I'd like to, if we table this today, I'd like to have more discussion about that to understand
All right,
exactly how that's
sure.
affected.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Carl?
I think water has been arguably the biggest issue we've dealt with over the last 4 years. We've had too little water, we've had too much water, we've had sewage, we've had water mains breaking, and of interest by this board in wanting to ramp up our schedule in replacing water mains. I think we're asking you to do a lot, and I'm concerned about reducing the funds that you have available to you to do the things that we think are important in the community. I guess that's all I would say.
I think we appreciate that you have a very hard choice in front of you, and the reality is that you reduce costs by reducing a tax or a rate burden, but you're also reducing service. And there's a cost to the citizen and a cost to the customers for that, and that's a very difficult thing to navigate. So we appreciate that. We'll provide you with some answers
Thank
to
you.
your question.
Is everybody done with their questions? I'm going to move that we place motion to amend number 2 on the table and publish it within the public notice that goes out. In order to get more information from Public Works just on what this does and how it does, I agree with Carl. Water has been a dominant topic here. Water and alcohol.
One leads to the other.
Okay, so that's been moved by Trent. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Cindy. Discussion on the motion?
How do you feel about that, John?
No, that's fine. I appreciate the discussion.
Carl?
We'll just-
Just to clarify, this is just a procedural vote.
Right.
We're not saying that you support it or oppose it or
Absolutely
anything.
not.
It's just, okay, all right.
Any other comments? I'd just like to say that, oh, it's not. Sorry. No comment. Okay.
No.
All right. Call the roll.
Eskridge,
Yes.
Fellers,
Yes.
Gaylord Baird,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Camp,
Yes.
Christensen.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay,
Agreed on something, John.
there you go. Well, of course we do.
Oops, sorry.
I'd like to make motion amend number 3. Hereby move to amend the capital improvement program budget resolution as follows: to remove the funding for a second brine mixing plant for Public Works Department from the CIP.
Second.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Motion by John, seconded by Roy. Discussion.
Well, if I may, we have a brine producing plant, and of course, we all had, I think nearly all of us, if not all, went on the tour here recently that the Public Works staff was so kind to share with us. And in the CIP is proposed to add a second plant. Part of the rationale was to get a quicker turnaround so they could have the brine. I personally have some concerns with just the use of brine and what it's doing to our street infrastructure. But setting that aside, this is not removing the use of brine for snow removal procedures. But I just think at this point in time, that would save us, I think it was $675,000 that we just don't need to spend at this time. Also, Ty Barger is doing his analyses and all, and I'm anxious to see how those progress over the next 2 years. So I think at this time, I just want to remove the funding for a second brine plant.
Discussion? Questions for staff? Well,
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if staff could
okay.
respond.
Could you come on up, Mickey? And
Yes?
haven't had a chance to discuss this with John before just now, so can you help us understand the purpose of the second brine mixing plant, why it's in your budget, in the CIP, and what the impact of taking it out would be?
Sure. So we feel like we've made brine better. We didn't invent the brine program. It's used across the country, but we have perfected it, and we found a way to reduce the concentration of salt in water so that we could mindfully apply it during winter time. But also, we are very precise with our application rates. So it's two things. It's reducing the concentration of salt, but also being precise about its application. We would like to expand that service and that ability to our customers. This is about customer care and customer service. Today, we don't have the ability to mobilize very efficiently. And know that the two types of brine that we do, both before and after and during the storm, both before and during the storm, we want to be able to optimize and maximize that ability. And here's why. If you look at number 2 here on the Elmo, that's what we're able to do with lots of rock salt. And we can broadcast this rock salt on the ground, and that's what our our ability is today. That's our level of service today. We can do that very effectively and efficiently. The reason we want to expand the brine capability is so that we can go back to using a very precise measure of concentrated salt and a precise application in 1 and 3. So it's not only about being more efficient, but it's also about getting away from the practice in number 2. I mean, look at the picture. You're using 100% concentrated rock salt that mixes with ice and snow at whatever concentration may be relative to the brine that is created when the snow melts. So what we want to do is optimize efficiency for customer service, but we also want to continue to reduce the concentration of salt that we use and be able to apply it in a very mindful way. So that's what we're trying to do with that facility.
If I could respond, I don't really want to, I mean, I could go on for hours on the brine itself, because as I said, I have some apprehensions on what it is. The application of rock salt, the comparison of that, most of that gets washed away, so it doesn't get in there.
I don't know if you have any data to support that, but there is 3 or 4 studies we have that says, you know, the application is the application. And what you can do best is actually reduce the amount of salt that you use in order to be safer.
I'm all for reducing, and
the
we have the brine
concentration
now,
of salt.
so it's just a matter of, we have it. And the only challenge might be if you have a back-to-back storm, you can't recruit. I think you said it's 32 hours to totally replenish your supplies.
Right.
And I think just in this sense of things for the budget and for our citizens, that we owe it to them to be as fiscally responsible with our funds. And at the same time, I'd much rather, I'm disappointed I haven't heard anything from Public Works saying we're going to step up our program to seal cracks, because that's the frontline defense there for our street infrastructure, which is billions of dollars in value. We're spending $400,000 a year on sealing cracks, which is, you know, as I said, we should be tripling that. So, you know, you've got the brine now. It's just you don't have 2 plants. You have 1 plant, and I think, and we can exist with that. And if you get that back-to-back storm, I guess we have to cope with it. But we don't have those very often, and so if even once a season. And so I think the $675,000 can better be spent elsewhere.
Trent, and then Cindy.
What's the source of funds for that $675,000?
So we have it as described as other financing because we want the flexibility. We've been realizing some savings, and you can see it here. The reduction in total salt tonnage and our de-icing costs have also gone down.
Okay.
By 31%. And so we'd like to divert any savings from, that we realize, is it 575? 575. Yeah, and the total amount we're asking for is 575. So we'd like to divert those funds, but also there's possibility that people have expressed interest in procuring brine and trying it and piloting it themselves, both public and private entities, and we'd like to engage them as a source of funds for expanding the capability.
So using them, that would be a license, or would you actually be delivering product?
We could do either. We've talked about, we're in the process of patenting the brine itself. We could either provide some brine, almost like a fueling station, and provide it that way, or we can assist in developing a program for those entities. It just depends on what they want.
So what you're saying is that the plant you have now will continue to remain in operation?
Absolutely.
And this is a capacity issue. So how much brine can you make with 2 plants, and how much do you need for a snowstorm?
I don't think we have.
The second plant would have the similar capabilities to do that, but we could do it in a shorter time.
Okay.
And it's not just back-to-back storms, but also, as we know, the weather changes. And as you saw, those recipes are dialed in very closely to temperatures. So if we take a look and we say, okay, we think it's going to be X at 32 to 36 hours out, and it turns in colder than that, then we're not using a brine that's effective enough. If it gets warmer than that, we're overusing the taxpayers' funds by putting something with the more expensive chemicals in it that we didn't need to. So it's not just the capacity, that's important.
So you might make 2 batches of brine, thinking it's going to hit at a certain level, and then maybe it changes, and then you have to fire up your second plant.
No, I might wait until 16 hours instead of 32 when I have a little better sense of what the temperature is going to be.
Okay. I like your map because I'm looking at those orange states and going,
Yeah, that's where we should be in the winter.
they don't have to brine. So.
Cindy?
I just want to verify that we're looking at the CIP project 0839, the brine production facility at 3200 Baldwin Avenue.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you, because we did have the 2 figures, and that's the 575,000 in the 2016-17 CIP, correct?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
As other financing.
I see on your chart that it not only says better and safer, it says cheaper. Can you address a little, I mean, we're talking about budgets. Help us understand why this is cheaper than business as usual.
Okay, so our de-icing costs in prior years were up to $86,000. And what we do, because we can control the concentration of salt, sodium chloride and calcium chloride, and the bits that we use for winter operations, we've been able, rather than broadcasting wholesale rock salt 100% concentration, we can reduce the material that we procure, that we purchase to blend those brines, and that's resulted in a 31% decrease in cost.
So more salt, more expensive, less salt, less expensive? Is it that
That's right,
simple?
because we are controlling the concentration of salt in the brine. We are pre-mixing sodium chloride with water, and that is what, plus beet juice, and a defoamer. And that's what we put out on the streets. When you broadcast 100% concentrated rock salt out of your trucks,
And calcium chloride in some concentrations?
we have studied the 4 studies that we've looked at, and I have them here. Calcium chloride concentration has to remain less than 3%.
Right.
Not
But
to
the colder
impact.
it gets, the more you have to use the calcium chloride,
Yes,
correct?
because of the effectiveness of calcium chloride at the lower temperature, and then.
That's the stuff that's the most destructive to the streets, right?
And it is, and the studies will show that the worst of the worst is mag chloride, which is also very expensive, so we've completely
Of course, the most
eliminated.
effective stuff is the most expensive and destructive, right?
And we don't want to use it. But calcium chloride at less than 3% actually is as stable as sodium chloride. So that's what we've learned from these studies.
I'm sorry,
That's right, Cindy, go
can I
ahead.
ask just one more question? You talked about patenting our solution.
Yes.
And selling it to others. And then I think Councilman Fellers asked you about licensing it to other places. Would it be possible to sell the license to an entity that was going to actually manufacture and be able to work some sweet deal for us buying it back?
I'm all for that. And yes, we are open to a lot of options. We've had expressed interest in just purchasing the liquid brine right out of our tankers, if possible. We've had people approach us, both private and public entities, about buying the entire program. But we also, what we'd really like to talk about is a public-private partnership where we have a brine manufacturer or vendor procure the to purchase this system, and then they would manufacture and sell it.
I
We
kinda
don't
like
want to
that
be in
idea,
the
too.
manufacturing business of brine. We don't want to do that.
I
But,
kind of like that idea too, but I don't think it requires a second plant.
it would, because we want to meet this. The second plant is about efficient service and customer service. So the second plant is not for producing brine for other users. It's for our own use.
Can you elaborate on that? How does it make customer service better? How does can you explain that?
So do you want to talk about the turnaround in time?
So like we talked about, so say we have back-to-back storms, if we've ran out of brine because of that, we can't provide good service to the roads and get them cleared. Second is, if we are using a brine that's ineffective because it's not dialed in for the right temperature,
Okay.
then we're not getting the road cleared. Vice versa, if we use something more powerful than we need to, we're not doing good customer service because we're spending money that we didn't need to spend.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Okay. So, we have the motion and the second. Let's call the roll.
Eskridge.
For any further discussion? Sorry, is that, okay, go ahead.
Eskridge.
No.
Fellers.
No.
Healer Baird.
No.
Lamb.
Yes.
Camp.
Yes.
Christensen.
Yes.
Motion ties 3-3. Fails.
Are there other?
Okay.
Oh,
Yes, I have another motion to amend number
run
4. And I hereby move that we, the funding for a new main library be delayed from the biennium 2017-18 to 2019-20.
Second.
Moved by John, seconded by Cindy. Discussion? Would you like to
Well, we had discussion the other day, and initially I just thought we'd remove it, but I'm open to discussing it. But I think right now, in economic times and so forth, a $42 million bond, a $50 million main library needs to be well thought out. And so I'm just saying let's put it off 2 years.
Any other comments from council members or staff questions? Okay.
Staff?
Carl,
No.
Pat, could you please come up?
Pat Leach, Director of Lincoln City Libraries.
Thanks, Pat. You've heard what Councilman Camp has proposed. Care to respond? How would this impact you and what the library board is proposing?
As I noted previously, we have done quite a few studies with public impact, with public input to look at the question of replacing our downtown library. And we've also had quite a bit of discussion in the recent years and months with potential partners or neighbors for mixed use projects to think through how might we be able to do this in a way that would be potentially a private-public partnership or part of a larger project of which a library would be part. If we delay this, what becomes difficult is moving forward with that kind of project, especially given how much is going on in downtown Lincoln right now. And so we realize that this is a major expense, and that's why we're spending quite a bit of time studying that and seeking people's opinion about that. Of course, we would be back to the council to place a bond issue on the ballot at the time that it would be appropriate to do so.
Okay. Thank you. I also had a question for Steve. So if the library did propose a bond issue and we put it on the ballot and the citizens voted to approve that bond issue, and that's sometime before, was it 2019, John, that you were putting this in? How would that impact the ability of the city and the library to go forward with the project?
Well, as Pat mentioned, you have to take an action to put it on the ballot. First of all, the item in the CIP kind of indicates when council thinks that would be appropriate to do that. If there were occasion to bring it forward, you could amend the CIP, bring it back to an earlier year at a later point if you so chose. You know, in the case of this particular project, that might be if a big donor comes forward sooner than 2019, 2020. That might warrant bringing that back forward from what John's proposing, 1920. You do have some flexibility of making a change later to the schedule of when that would come to a vote.
So if we kept the CIP, kept it in the CIP as it is now, then there's flexibility going forward after that. It's not saying we need to spend this much money in that particular time period. It's somewhere in the 6 years, or it could even be extended beyond that, I suppose.
Yeah, I look at it more as when you're likely to come forward and put it on the ballot for the public to vote on.
Okay.
Because nothing gets billed unless the public votes for a bond issue in this case.
Okay. Thank you.
And certainly we are working on the private support aspect of a new central library, and see the timing of the CIP project as helping us to talk with potential donors as far as supporting this project.
Thanks.
So what impact would moving this out a few years, do you think, have on your discussions with donors?
Well, I think donors are very interested in knowing, what will my money go for? What would that be like? How do we time this in a way that is most effective? So in that sense, it would certainly have an impact in our discussions. The other aspect is there's so much going on right now in downtown Lincoln. And although the library board is very clear about its preference for the Pershing site and continues to look toward that site, one of our phrases has been, if somebody comes forward with property on a platter, that is, if a property as a result of other things going on downtown and in the West Haymarket come through, we're certainly interested in listening to all of those potential ideas. And we see its placement in the CIP as a signal that we would be in a position to have those conversations with things that may be going on downtown, that we would be able to listen to potential partners, neighbors, on a private-public partnership that might include a library as part of it. So the timing in the CIP does impact those kinds of discussions as well.
So it sounds like your flexibility is maximized by having it in the CIP where it is today. Moving it out reduces some of that flexibility for those conversations and potential support opportunities.
I think that's fair to say, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, I guess, oh, sorry, Cindy.
No, I don't have any
Yeah.
questions. I just
More
wanted to have a
discussion?
little discussion.
Yeah, let's do
If
that.
you're ready.
Yep.
for that.
Cindy.
Okay. So on the libraries, when it moved up in the CIP this year, last year in the CIP, it was already at 2019, 2020. And I know that the bond for the Walt and Isley libraries are going to be paid off in 2019. And as I understand the CIP, what we do when we have something in the CIP is we're granting permission to spend money on that, whether somebody's doing a study or whatever, to spend money in that area. And so I guess when we're looking at holding the line on this particular budget and what the taxpayers are faced with as far as tax increases and so forth, I feel that I will support to move it to the 1920. And if something happens and it comes up, because what I understood was there's flexibility either way. If we move it to 1920, there's flexibility to pull it forward if there's a bond that goes forward or a bond vote that goes forward. So, is that right, Steve?
Yeah, I think for a bond vote to go forward, the first thing you would do would be to amend the CIP to bring it into the period of time when you're talking about putting the bond on the ballot.
So there's flexibility either way.
Yeah, I would say so, yes.
Others? Do you want to say anything? No. Okay. Okay, let's call the roll.
Eskridge.
No.
Fellers.
Yes.
Gaylor Baird.
No.
Lamb.
Yes.
Camp.
Yes.
Christensen.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-2.
And I have one more,
Okay.
Madam Chair. We'll
Let's
call
go.
this number
this.
5, I guess, okay. This is one I know we'll get unanimous support on.
Oh, never say never. I mean, good grief.
I hereby move to amend the budget resolution as follows. Move that $60,000 be added to the 2016-17 budget year for the city council budget and miscellaneous budgets / general expense split appropriately between salary, city council budget, and benefits, general expense budget, to add 1 full-time equivalent position to the city council budget, and with $80,000 to be added in the second year of the biennium.
Second.
Moved by John and seconded
Yeah.
by Roy.
So basically, get a staff person with city council, $60,000 to help pay salary and benefits the first year, recognizing there would be a phase-in, and then $80,000 the second year.
Is there a source of funding for that in your motion?
From the miscellaneous budgets and general expense.
But that would require revenue.
Well, I'm going to be working with Mr. Fellers. We will.
The source of the funding is Mr. Fellers.
I think that we're going to.
You guys are on your own. When I came on the city council in 1999, the prior council members had set up discretionary funds to help the council members, and we had that for a few years, and it was helpful. Each of us had a certain amount, and we were able to get assistance, and some of us chose to really use that. And then I was in a session similar to this that the fire department said they needed some radios and they didn't have it, and so one of my colleagues made a motion that we give up our discretionary funds to buy radios for the fire department, and that was a tough vote. You know, fire, council, we kind of on the short end of the stick, but it begs the question though that we, with 7 members and just having one secretarial position, we need to get into the modern age and have somebody who can help us go through all this material. And I compliment my colleagues because I know they work many hours on this, and I think we can also work more effectively with the administration and be more up in tune with matters.
Carl.
So this is an additional position to
Yes.
the one that we currently have, and,
Yeah.
and maybe for people out there, city council has one staff currently.
We used to have 2. We gave up 1 actually,
Okay.
and our budget has gone down or stayed flat for the last 10, 15 years.
Okay, and we've talked a little bit about our expectations about what the person would do, and I suppose we need to hammer that out in some way as to what kind of skills we'll be looking for. But do you have a proposal as to what?
Well, I'm looking at somebody who could be a researcher for us on various activities that could help coordinate our questions that we have with the administration. I'd almost like to say a chief of staff type person, except we only have a staff of 2. Maybe somewhere down the road we'll consolidate some other areas. But I'm more than open to getting a good definition of responsibilities. I just want to see somebody that can act in a non-political way, who can really facilitate our work with the administration and also with constituents. There's a lot of follow-up at times that I think that individual with the proper training can be very effective for us and the citizens.
Cindy.
Yeah, I have to say, we've been talking about this for a while. Of course, once we got the budget, I feel like we've been in a time crunch, and this hasn't been like the priority of what we're looking for. But I know that Jane's interested in the position also. She mentioned before she left that she wouldn't be here today. And I don't know if she's looked at a source of funding, but one of the things we've talked about is perhaps having someone move from another office, maybe the city attorney's office, or from the ombudsman and the mayor's office or something, to fill that kind of a role for us. So I don't know if she's identified any funds, and I feel as if maybe because she didn't talk to me about any. Did she talk with anyone else? If she didn't, I'm thinking maybe if we put this on hold to see if she's identified what funds, or if we're talking about switching a position. How do you feel about that, John?
I'd like to pass this today so the public knows and they can understand that
Okay.
we need to not have our hands tied behind our back as much. I think it's just a very important step.
Trent.
Steve, could I ask a question? Can we add something to the budget that doesn't balance it?
Well,
I mean, if we don't have a source of funds for this,
yeah,
how do we
no,
do
you
that?
can't. You do have to keep it balanced. Just taking a quick look at the math here, I think with the addition of those dollars, you haven't quite eliminated the tax increase if it were to be paid with property taxes.
Okay.
Rick Hoppy, Mayor's Office. This may seem self-serving as one of the guys kind of pointed to for potentially switching personnel, but would you consider laying it over like you did one of the other pieces so that it was on the agenda? I could certainly make sure it got added to the insert for the Journal Star. That would give you time to work on the financial end of it and how you intended to come up with the funding.
That's what I was thinking. If John's okay with that.
Forgive me for
I know
stealing
I'm
your
doing
thunder,
this
Councilman.
twice, John, and I'm sorry.
Well, I'd like to see commitment among my colleagues, and I'm looking at this for future benefits, because I really appreciated what the prior council members did prior to my coming on board in 1999, because it was an important step. And I will say that to several of the colleagues too, I remember Doug Emery and all said, Garsh doesn't want to get anything for council as long as other people aren't getting something, but I think we can operate more efficiently and be more productive for the citizens. And so it's something that actually will be a very synergistic position. But if it makes people feel comfortable to lay it over, fine, but let's have some good discussions, because I'd be very, very disappointed if we can't get concurrence and move forward with something.
Carl.
Okay, I appreciate actually John's persistence in bringing this. I have been a little slow to come around, but I do see the benefit of the position. And if we could hold it over and get the source of funding for it in place, I think that would make me feel really good about it. Yeah.
I move that we lay on the table motion amendment number 5.
Second.
Moved by
Thank you, John.
Trent, seconded by John. You can call the roll, please.
Eskridge. Fellers.
Yes.
Wheeler, Baird.
Yes.
Lamb.
Yes.
Camp.
Yes.
Christensen.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay. Other amendments to the amended mayor's budget proposal? Seeing none, I'd like to offer one, but in order for the council chair to offer an amendment, I need to pass the proverbial gavel to my colleague, the vice chair, Roy. So
I will now
There
conduct
you
the meeting and ask Lyrian if she has any amendments.
Me too. And here it is.
We will call this Amendment 7. Is that correct? 6?
It's 6.
6. Oh, 6, that's right. Okay.
The purpose of my amendment is to modify the proposal that's on the table that is essentially the offering that Trent has put forward, and to modify it to make the cuts that I agree with, but to restore some funding for the items where we have a disagreement about their value. So my motion to amend restores funding to the Emerald Ash Borer, keeping it at the 500,000 level. It restores the funding of the general fund transfer to building and safety, keeping it at its current level. And it restores the debt service payment in year 2 for the certificates of participation. And it has 2 other ways to help achieve still a significant reduction in the property tax increase proposed by the mayor. The combined total of this package reduces the property tax increase proposed by the mayor by just over $1 million. I'd like to say that considering we are looking at the mayor's proposal for about a $1.98 million tax increase, and on the other end, keeping the levy flat, I would like to suggest that this is actually where the middle is in this discussion. This is, in my mind, a true compromise between the proposals before us. And the other ways that I achieve the $1 million cut, in addition to the places where Trent's proposal and mine are the same, and where I've made changes are in 2 other ways. I propose that we use, instead of general fund, I propose that we use the Fast Forward Fund to pay for the increase to the Lincoln Partnership for Economic Development. And I'd like to propose that instead of the $100,000 transfer for snow removal, that we do, that we we cut that transfer by 85,000 and increased the transfer from street construction by 85,000. So what I know that people are just seeing this now, and if we'd like to pause, I think Trent had suggested that we'd take a brief moment to, did you still want to do that, Trent?
This is fairly straightforward, so
Okay.
I don't think a pause is necessary unless my
Okay.
colleagues want a second to take a look at it. But yeah, it's
Okay.
very straightforward and concise. So thank you.
So,
Okay.
before that, is there a second for this motion?
Second.
It's been moved by Illyrian, seconded by Carl. Are there staff questions?
Well, I have a question.
Well,
Larry.
can I
just
Will you
finish
tell me how you
explaining?
get to $1 million each year on savings?
Yes. So
My math isn't working here.
we have our amended proposal before us. The way that mine is different is that I do not cut 425,000 from Emerald Ash Borer. I do not cut the general fund transfer to building and safety by 600,000. I do not cut the $420,000 payment for the streetlights lease financing. My cut to the snow removal budget, instead of 100,000 as proposed by Trent, mine is bigger. In year one, it's 185,000, and in year two, it's 485,000. And then, in addition, something that Trent does not propose doing is, my addition is that we use fast-forward funding in place of general fund to pay for the LPED increase. To me, this package, these cuts that total $1,094,929 are the fiscally responsible cuts that we can make. To go further than that creates a hole in the budget in future years. It asks people in the future to pay for things that we're not willing to pay for today. It's putting things on the credit card. I'm not willing to do that. I want to try and make sure that we can pay for the things that we're asking the city to do. I want to support the growth of the city. I think this package does that. I think it does it in a fiscally responsible way. It still achieves a major reduction in the mayor's proposed increase. And I truly believe this is where we meet in the middle.
Okay. Steve?
I just wanted to make sure, Larry, and I think you said that you're cutting $485,000 from the snow removal budget.
Year two.
Year two. And that's actually from the snow removal fund?
Yes.
So there'd be $485,000 less budgeted for snow removal? Or would it be replaced by other funds?
Replaced by the street construction
Okay.
fund in Public Works budget.
Here,
The mechanism is the same as Trent's proposing. The amount is different.
Okay.
Other staff questions?
I have a question for Larry.
Yeah.
So the 200,000 from Fast Forward, that too is one-time money, correct?
That is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. To be completely transparent, my thought there is that we could reevaluate in the next biennium whether that is, what the best use of those fast forward funds going forward. But the fast forward fund is created for economic development. It aligns with the purposes of LPED perfectly. But in a year that we're trying to eliminate a property tax increase, increasing their existing allocation of $500,000 to $700,000 is something we have to look at, because that's a big jump. And I want them to take that money and help us grow the city. I think the source is what I'm having a trouble with. If we want to reduce that property tax increase, there are only so many places we can go. Like Trent said, the general fund cut, the pots of general fund money are scarce, and they're not very big, and this is a $200,000 savings to the general fund if we use fast forward money instead.
Any other comments? Carl?
Yes. Thanks, Larry, for bringing this, and this really does kind of build on what Trent had done.
Yeah.
So this is kind of accepting some of the things that he has, but replacing some other pieces of it, as I understand it. Is that
It
generally
includes
right?
many of the cuts.
Okay, thanks. And it's halfway between what Trent's proposed and what the mayor had proposed in his budget. So thanks for your work in trying to find that sweet spot, I guess. I'm largely supportive of it. I think it's important that we do have a budget that's responsible for the future. And with the 2-year budget process, we have to have things in place that we anticipate what the next 2 years will bring, and we know. I mean, we know that the Emerald Ash Borer is here, and we can just expect that we're going to have to be spending money on that. And I think just from the starting point, it's not just a parks issue. This is really a public safety issue in terms of the trees and the safety of people in our community. So that's a important starting point. We've already talked about building and safety issues, and so I'm supportive. I appreciate your work.
Other comments? Questions?
If I may, I'm sorry.
Speak up quick with me.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Well, it's this tall guy, his head in the way. So, okay. So I'm disappointed because when, like Councilman Christensen said at the beginning, he was looking for cuts to the property tax. The mayor was looking for increases in the property tax, and I was hoping we would meet in the middle at no property tax increase at all. And I think that that's what Trent has accomplished, attempted to accomplish in his motion and his amendment. And so I'm looking at this and I'm saying basically you're just not wanting to cut as much in order to eliminate property tax. And I'm just going to say again, you could put in here another $250,000 almost in cutting raises to appointees of the mayor, and that may have taken care of it. But the people that we represent in Lincoln, they don't get to have those kinds of increases every year in their pay. But we keep talking about piling on property taxes, and then we're talking about the water fees and so forth. And so I had hoped that we would all come to agreement on something that would hold the line on property taxes, and I'm disappointed, and I'm not going to support this for that reason. I think that Trent did a great job, reached out to a lot of people, and yeah, he did make some smaller cuts where they needed to be had. So while I appreciate you working on this, I can't support it.
John?
Yeah, if I may on that, as I said at the outset, one of the concerns I have is we talk about cutting the property tax. All we're talking about is we get more property taxes each year. We get more dollars in sales taxes each year. We get more occupation taxes and fees. Those have constantly gone up. And what the mayor has proposed is not just, we'll still get those more, but he wants more on the property tax side. I think we're looking at that. And in this last year, we had the quarter-cent sales tax that we supported to get across, so we'd have public safety, get new fire stations and a joint police and fire station. So there's another addition to the taxpayers for the next 3 years. We had a couple of years ago that, on their sister joint public agency in the West Haymarket did the 2% sales tax on food and other sundry items. But we've had constantly increases in so many categories, and the citizens are they're getting very concerned. As messages I'm getting, the emails, and just saying, and we're looking at a recycling measure this evening, but that's going to be having increased fees there, and we have just continued to increase the rates, not even realizing we're getting increases just due to the growth. We've talked about how we have this great growth in Lincoln. Well, if we've got this great growth in Lincoln, it should be paying for this. We shouldn't have to increase a mill levy tax. And so
Well, I would like to respond to John.
Okay, this will be the last. Yeah. Everybody's had a chance to speak.
I've enjoyed this process. I think it's been a really, there's been great communication. We've been talking to each other, and I do appreciate the work on both sides. When you say that the growth of the city should cover our expenses, That's what I'm trying to do with my proposal. If we dig ourselves into a $1.5 million hole in future years, new growth in revenues in the next biennium won't go to supporting our programs. It's going to fill that hole, leaving nothing to support the growth of the city, or leaving less to support the growth of the city. If we want to support this growth of the city in a fiscally responsible way, we need to make sure we aren't creating a gap in the future. I believe that this package of cuts, which includes over like 8 of the ones that Trent has proposed where we could agree, and where I restore things where we didn't agree, I think it's supporting the growth of the city, and it's doing it in a fiscally responsible way so that next time in the next biennium we can use any growth in property tax revenues to pay for things that people expect us to pay for, not to pay for a deficit that they didn't realize was there.
Okay. Steve, will you call the roll, please?
Eskridge,
Yes.
Fellers,
No.
Gaylord Baird,
Yes.
Lamb,
No.
Camp,
No.
Christensen.
No.
Motion fails 2-4.
Okay, I turn the gavel back over to
Okay.
the chair.
All right, so we don't have any more motions. We have an amended budget resolution that we will publicize, and I will just reiterate that the council will vote on the final changes to this amended budget resolution on August 10th. And prior to that, we will have a public hearing on August 8th. Encourage people to weigh in, make their voices heard. They can do that in person at that meeting, or they can certainly continue to email and contact us in other ways. And the budget will ultimately be adopted on August 22nd as dictated by the charter. Thank you for your help, Steve. Go ahead.
Do we need a motion for adjournment? Or do we just adjourn?
Well, why don't we have one?
Before I move to adjourn, I want to say that that was an incredibly civil discussion. And I appreciate how this meeting was conducted, given things that have happened in the past. I think that we've done this right. With that, I'll move for adjournment.
Second.
Moved by Trent and seconded by Roy. Call the roll.
Eskridge,
Yes.
Fellers,
Yes.
Gaylord Baird,
Yes.
Lamb. Yes. Camp,
Yes.
Christensen.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.